All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition for our Killer Angel show. We got Phil Davis back, who is head of our artillery corps here on the Killer Angels, and he's going to bring us in tonight and tell us some interesting stuff a lot of us probably don't know about, and that is shells, different types, how they explode, what made them go boom, and all kind of good stuff. So, Phil, what was the most common shell like at the beginning of the war? Which one did both sides have?
Well, at the beginning of the war, the most common shell on both sides was a 6 pounder shell. It was a smooth
Now,
bore shell.
hold on. What? Because I'm often confused like this when somebody says 6 pounder shell, 6 8. Did it weigh actually 6 pounds or was what did that mean?
The pounder designation is the old way of telling cannon calibers. The pounder designation is a solid iron of the bore diameter weighs 6 pounds. Now, a shell is going to be because it's hollow in the middle.
Right. Okay.
So what you're looking at with the 6 pounder would be a 3.67 inch bore, which fired a 3.52 inch. There had to be a little airspace around the outside of it called windage.
So the shells, the 3.25, the shells. All right, tell me again what the 3.25 inch means.
3.52 inch shell would fit down a 3.67 inch bore. They had to have a little space around the shell called windage, and that windage will become very important when we start talking about how a shell works. You had to have.
When you say that 3.52, are you talking about the shell itself?
Yes, that's the diameter of the shell.
Only 3
3.52.
Got you. Okay. All right. Now, because a lot of our people out here that we hear this say, "Oh, that's a 22-pound gun," and we often wonder, well, what does that actually mean? So okay, so the diameter of the shell is 3.52.
3.52 is the diameter of the shell. The bore diameter of the gun would be 3.67.
Now, in that first ones that they had, how much damage is that going to do?
Well, the best way I can tell you is muzzle energy. That is the kind of impact the ball would have when it hits. Most people are familiar with a 45 caliber pistol today.
Right.
A 45 has about 400 foot-pounds of energy.
Okay.
A 6 pounder solid shot has approximately 382,000 foot-pounds of energy.
Okay. So at the beginning of the war, the most common thing was that solid shot round you're talking about.
The 6 pounder cannon. The 6 pounder cannon would fire solid shot, shell, case shot, and canister shot. It would fire all of those different ones. It would do different projectiles for different applications.
And before I stop you one time, and then I'll let you go, I just want to get this out here. At the beginning of the war, did they have all these types of ammunitions available, or just the solid shot?
They had all of them available.
Okay, take it from there.
They had exploding shells since the 1600s.
Okay.
And
all right, so I'm sorry, I was going to say you were just going to tell us about that 6-pound shot. So I was going to let you go ahead and finish telling us about that first one they had at the start of the Civil War. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, not a problem. The technology to make shells explode hadn't changed much since the 16 and 1700s, right before the Civil War.
Really?
I'm going to hold this here. I hope you can see it okay.
I can see it.
See the shell okay? Okay. This is a Confederate 12-pounder case shot. This is actually from the Battle of Petersburg. But you see this hole right here? That is where the fuse was put in. The fuse for this was basically a tube of black powder wrapped in plastic. It was compressed black powder. You'd cut it off to different lengths so that the burn time would be different. Now, you'd press that in there and you'd use a fuse punch to drive it down in there solidly. And then when the cannon went off, the flash from the cannon would wrap around the shell through that gap that I told you about that was so important, and it would light that fuse. When it lit the fuse, the time would start and it would go flying down range. It would detonate at the time designated by the length of that fuse. That had not.
Did the fuse, the time they fused, was that based on, okay, they'll be here at 300 yards, 500 yards, 700 yards? Is that how they did that?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
You have what's called a table of fire inside the lumber chest, the ammunition chest, for the guy that told you what the time of flight for solid shot, for case shot, and for shell was at various different distances. And you had to cut the fuse so that it would explode right before it reached your target. And it was a matter of science to cut your fuse just right. That's how fuses had been cut since the 1600s. Now, in the 1850s, a man named Borman invented a new fuse type, and I brought just the fuse in, a Borman fuse. And if you can you see the little numbers on there?
Yeah.
Okay, that was a dial that you would actually dial that to the seconds, or actually there's little lines that quarter seconds or eighths of seconds. And then you would gouge out the area that's underneath the pointer right there with an awl. This is made out of zinc, and you would actually gouge that out, and that would expose a powder train. And this is a much more accurate way of cutting fuses for smoothbore artillery. It's called the Borman fuse. Both the Union and the Confederates used the Borman type fuse, but the Confederates' quality control was so poor that they went back to using the paper time fuses like I just showed you.
So it exploded, right?
Hmm?
So it exploded just like a blast going off, or was it spraying,
with a shell, it was an explosion, and you'd have the metal outside part of that ball would fly off in fragments. Now, a case shot like the one I was just holding up was a thinner wall, iron wall, but it also had iron balls inside of it, so that when it went off, you'd have the fragmentation from the outside of the shell, plus the iron balls would fly down range.
So you got like a huge shotgun blast.
Yes, at long range.
How many people do you think that's taken out?
In the British Army, that's where we get the term shrapnel from.
Shrapnel, okay. How many people is that taking out?
Just a matter of luck, but it could take out as many as 10, 15, 20 people with one hit if it's timed properly.
One hit, you got a 1,500 man brigade charge, and you start getting hit with those things. I mean, just ripping shreds.
Yeah. Now, also right before the Civil War started, the advent of rifled artillery, and this is a Hotchkiss shell from a 3-inch ordnance rifle. This particular shell came from Gettysburg, and you can see it had a fuse hole in the front for the paper time fuse, just like that round ball did. And if you look, there's grooves cut in the side of that shell. Those grooves will let the flame go up there and light the fuse.
Phil, let me stop you for just a second. For those of you people who don't know, before rifling, how much range did a cannon have, artillery have before rifling?
At the beginning of the Civil War, like a 6-pounder, 12 to 1,500 yards.
Really, I didn't realize it was that far. Okay, after the Civil War.
No, it was for an area target. I mean, you were not talking about hitting a man-sized target. You're talking about putting it in an area where a regiment might be. I mean, It's not super duper accurate, but it was capable of putting a shell on target at that distance. Now, with the advent of rifled artillery, that stretches out to 2,500 yards, 3,000 yards, etc., which is beyond the capability of the time fuse, because they weren't long enough. A 5-second fuse on this thing will make this shell explode at about 1,800 yards, which is way short of its maximum range.
So does that explain what we've seen? We see in Civil War movies, and we see some of these explosions in the air. Is that what that is?
It's exactly what you're seeing. You're seeing time fused shells exploding in the air.
Thank you. Somebody asked a question the other day, and I said, I have no idea.
As a matter of fact, going back to the Star Spangled Banner, where it talks about rockets, red glare, bombs bursting in the air, they're talking about mortar bombs, artillery shells exploding in the air.
Okay, perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Right. And in order to take advantage of the increased accuracy and increased range of the Civil War artillery and the ability to hit your target without having to time your fuse at such long ranges, in the 1850s, they came up with this type of fuse. This is also a 3-inch ordnance rifle shell. This particular one came from Shiloh. But if you see, it doesn't have a hole in the front. It's just got a slot, looks like a big screwdriver slot. That's because this is a percussion shell. This explodes upon impact. Like we think of modern artillery shells, when it hits something, it goes off. Now, this had a slider inside of it with a musket cap on the end of it, and when it hit something, it would slide against this end cap here with the screw thing on it, and it would set off a musket cap, just like a musket hammer would, and it would set off the bursting charge inside the shell.
Wow.
Now, why would one of these not go off? Maybe it tumbled in flight and it did not hit nose first. Maybe it was shot at such long range that it slowed down to the point that it tumbled slightly or wobbled slightly and it hit sand or mud or water, and it didn't detonate. But that's how these work. These, and I don't know if you can hear it.
Yeah.
You hear that little rattle sound?
Yeah.
That was the slider inside that shell sliding back and forth.
Okay. I got a quick question for you. And it may be self-explanatory. They already said, but you I'm sure you may have seen a movie that was based off the Killer Angels, Gettysburg. When Longstreet's out there talking to Harrison and he's telling him what's fixing to happen, and he goes, as soon as the troops step out, they'll be under fire, blah, blah, blah. He goes, solid shot, percussion, canister, everything they have. Percussion, is that what exactly is percussion?
That's percussion.
Okay, that's how you explain. Okay, every gun they got. Okay.
Yeah.
And so now I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're looking at pickets men being fired at by 3-inch rifles like this and 12-pounders like I just showed you. So the air would have been filled with fragments of shells and the roaring of shells going overhead. And these things make a very nasty sound when they go overhead. I actually laid down and I own 2 cannons. I had my cannons fired over my head. I was laying in a trench so I could hear what they sounded like.
So you still got the solid shot coming too, right?
You got solid shot, and the way a solid shot would have been used against the Pickett's charge, they'd have aimed about 25 yards in front of the infantry line. It would have hit the ground and skipped, and it would have taken them off at the knees, and then it would just kept climbing. So the first rank would have hit about shins or knees, and it would keep climbing. The second one would hit about waist level. Third rank would have hit about here, and fourth rank would have been headless horseman time.
And I bet it's taking. I mean, and how much was one of those weighs? Just curious. A solid shot ball.
Well, it depends on the size of the gun, but a 12-pounder would have weighed 12 pounds.
Okay, that makes sense. So I imagine something even that size would just about cut a man in two.
Yes, you would literally explode if you were hitting a chest with a solid shot going full speed. Even when they had slowed down and they were just rolling across the ground, you could see them rolling across the ground. The Union Army in 1862 had to issue a general order telling people not to try to stop large solid shot with their foot because people were having their legs ripped off, or they would put their toe down to try to catch it. And you ever seen someone try to make a soccer ball hop up off the ground by putting their toe down in front of it?
Oh yeah.
Well, imagine a 24-pounder solid shot rolling towards you, and it looks like it's rolling fairly slow, like 20, 30 miles an hour. Well, you put your toe down like that, it's going to hit your toe. It's going to come right up and off goes the head.
So, quick question for you, and I'm sure because this overlays because you know so much about artillery. I'd read that in the Navy that they had solid shots weighed as much as 600 pounds. What was the largest weight of a solid shot that the armies used?
Well, the Army, there's three types of artillery. There's field artillery, which is troops traveling with the infantry and the cavalry. There is
Right.
siege artillery.
There's what now?
Siege artillery. They would have been larger.
Siege artillery. I'm sorry. Yes, yes.
That would have followed the army along behind. So if they entered into a siege, these were the heavier guns, so they would set up in the emplacements and batter down walls. And then there was seacoast artillery. Now, the heaviest field artillery solid shot used during the Civil War was a 12-pounder because that was the biggest smoothbore gun that traveled with the field artillery. They had howitzers, but howitzers never fired solid shot. They always fired shell or canister because the wall thickness was thinner, and it was dangerous. They'd never fire solid shot out of a howitzer. It was only out of a gun. And the biggest gun to travel with the field armies was a 12-pounder smoothbore or a 20-pounder Parrott rifle, which was a 20-pound solid rifle projectile.
Gosh.
Now, the biggest projectiles used during the war, they only made a few of them, and I don't know that any of them were actually used in battle because they were all in the fortifications around Washington. Was a 20-inch solid shot, the 20-inch Rodman. The 20-inch shell, I believe, I'm trying to remember, I think a 20-inch shell weighed somewhere in the range of 500 to 550 pounds. I'm not familiar. I've never seen one of the 20-inch shells. I've only seen pictures of the guns. The 15-inch shell guns were more common. Then of course, you had rifled guns during the Civil War. You had a 200-pounder Parrott rifle that had an 8-inch bore, but it had a 200-pound shell. I have a Confederate
200-pound shell, a solid shot 200-pound shell that was rifled. Oh God!
An elongated cylindrical solid shot that weighed 200 pounds.
And sorry, how far would those? You missed that. And I missed it. A 200 rifled Parrott shot. How far would that travel?
Those big Seacoast guns had an incredible range, 15,000 yards.
15,000 yards you could fire at a target.
You're talking miles.
That's why, yeah. You're like 8-9 miles. You're firing at a target off. Wow.
And capable of penetrating a wood-sided warship at miles.
God, that's how much advances.
The heaviest shell that I personally own is a Confederate 7-inch Brooke rifle shell that was recovered in Charleston, and it weighs 124 pounds.
124 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just.
And it still had an 8,000 or 9,000 yard range.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around that many that many are going that far. Okay. Question on a battery. We talked about this the other night. Would a battery have a different mixture of guns, or would it all pertain the same amount of guns?
At the beginning of the war, it was very common to have what was called a mixed howitzer and gun battery. The most common one, and by regulations from the 1840s through the early 1860s, a standard battery in the U.S. Army consisted of 4 guns and 2 howitzers. The most common was 4 6-pounder guns and 2 12-pounder howitzers. That gave them the ability to fire a solid shot to batter a target, and howitzers to fire over fortification to fire shell into a location. In the Confederate Army, the standard battery was reduced down to 4 guns, and for quite a while they still had the mixed batteries. And at the beginning of the war, in the Confederacy in the West especially, you may have had a battery that had 3 or 4 different calibers of guns in it because they were just so short on artillery pieces. They just put them together however they could. It was a logistics nightmare to get 3 or 4 different kinds of ammunition for a battery. By 1862, the Union Army was starting to standardize on a 6-gun battery. all, or what was called a homogeneous battery, or all the same type gun. So you
Okay.
might have a battery of 3-inch rifles, or a battery of 20-pounder Parrott rifles, or a battery of 12-pounder Napoleons. By 1862, the older guns like the 6-pounders and the 12-pounder field howitzers were being drawn out of service, and they were being melted down and cast into the Napoleon, which was the iconic smoothbore of the war. The same thing was going on in the Confederacy too, but it just went a lot slower. And by 1863, at Gettysburg, the Union had no 6-pounders on the field. The Confederacy had one 6-pounder on the field, but the last 6-pounder to be retired from active field service was in the Confederate Army, and it was not replaced until the summer of 1864 outside of Atlanta, and that was Douglas's Texas Battery. They had 6-pounders and 12-pounders that they had all the way through the war that were completely worn out, and it was only when the first Illinois battery, the Chicago Board of Trade battery, was captured. Those 12-pounders were turned over to Douglas's battery, and that was when the last 6-pounder was returned. Removed from field service. It was in the middle of 1864, with less than a year of the war left.
Okay, back to a couple of the questions I had from talking about Gettysburg a while ago. All right, Longstreet says when he's out there and he goes, when they cross that field, they'll come up under short range artillery fire, canister firing, canister, something like tearing holes in lines. Canister that was small pieces of shrapnel that was just blasted like
a canister. If you can imagine a load of buckshot from a 12-gauge shotgun. Okay, imagine that expanded up to be the size of that. Okay, you're looking at a can that is basically like a half-gallon paint can that is full of iron balls. A Confederate, a canister had a 12-pounder canister had 27 2.12-inch diameter balls in it.
Okay, so yeah, so we talked. Okay, that was the same thing that I touched on when I asked you earlier about that. Then when I said the giant shotgun blast, so that's what the canister was. It wasn't. Somehow I thought the canister was maybe smaller and just going in. I didn't realize the balls were that big when they said canister. Okay, now of course on Pickett's Charge, Longstreet says all their guns open up on us, blah blah blah. During Pickett's Charge, when they launched, when they let go of the largest bombardment ever on American soil, what all guns were they using? I mean, they couldn't use short ranged. I mean, what guns were they using?
Well, the Union Army, the Army of the Potomac, had standardized pretty much by that point on 4 different types of guns for the most part. There was a 3-inch ordnance rifle, which is what the 2 rifle shells that I brought here with me today were fired out of. The 10-pounder Parrott rifle, which is a 2.9-inch bore rifle, it was a little longer and manufactured a little differently than the ordnance rifle. It had an iron band shrunk around the rear of it to reinforce it. They had the 20-pounder Parrott rifle, which was a bigger Parrott rifle, a 3.67-inch bore rifle, and the 12-pounder Napoleon. So they had all of those types of guns firing on the line all the way across that field. And due to the range differences, they came closer. The projectiles fired changed. At long range, they were shooting solid shot, trying to skip it off the ground and let it, literally you're bowling.
No, I don't mean, excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't mean what the Union was firing. I meant when the Confederates opened up their hour-and-a-half bombardment, what guns were they using?
In the preparatory bombardment.
Yeah, okay. What was Alexander using to bombard them with?
The Confederacy had a wider variety of guns because they did not have the manufacturing facility to uniform their batteries. You had a lot of 12-pounder Napoleons. You had a lot of 3-inch rifles, both Parrotts and ordnance rifles. You also had 3.5-inch Blakely rifles, which came from England. And they actually had the most accurate artillery piece of the war. They had a single 12-pounder Whitworth rifle. The Whitworth rifle had a hexagonal. It was a breech loading cannon. It had a hexagonal bore, that you loaded it from the back. You literally fitted the shell into the rifling because it was hexagonal. It only fit in there one way. You'd put your powder bag in behind it. You'd close your breech, and you'd fire it. And it was incredibly accurate. It was the sniper rifle of artillery, and the Confederacy had those, but very few of them.
Oh, sniper. I'm going to write that down and look that up. So, as far as shell wise, was it? I mean, was they using solid shot, percussion, and
they use solid shot and percussion shell. There were sometimes few shell, but very few because of the way the bore was fitted on the Whitworth. You remember me saying that there had to be a gap to let that fire go up there and light the fuse. The Whitworth shell fit so tight they misfired a lot. The Whitworth was pretty much kept for counter battery firing. That they would use those to knock out Union artillery pieces.
Okay. And probably just off question. Why was Alexander? Why did he miss so bad?
You look at any engagement in the Civil War, and the Confederacy had a tendency. They didn't have a chance to train very much. Neither did the Union, for that matter. But in most cases, you'll find that most of the artillery during the Civil War overshot the target.
Which brings me one more great question I wanted to ask you. And I know you've seen and I know I'll butcher the term of it, but when Lee's explaining to Longstreet about we'll concentrate all our guns on that mass section, he says something like a foot on fire, as Napoleon would call it. Mm-hmm. Well, I looked up and it stands for something like wall of fire, hell of fire. And I've been looking for this. I've been searching it. And I've been asking for all kinds of military historians. Do you ever know of an incident in which another army fired all their guns and concentrated on such a small area that it broke up all their defenses before everybody ran off? I cannot find any place where that has ever worked, where it broke up. Never?
To my knowledge, it has never happened where it's completely wiped out all resistance. It has been used to weaken it enough that you can break through, but it's never completely wiped it out. You know, everybody says, oh, well, we're going to pound it flat with artillery. We're going to turn it into a parking lot, and all you're going to do is go in and paint the lines. We still tell our troops that today, that our air forces are going to do that. We're going to bomb them back. You're going to go in there and paint the lines. It never happened. It didn't happen in the Civil War with Napoleon. It didn't happen in Iraq or Afghanistan. Okay.
I mean, even I've went back and I've looked at Normandy. I've looked at all the beach poundings from the ship out there in World War II. There's never been nothing that busted away all their defenses, so there was nothing there. I mean, I've never found it where it worked. I told somebody, I said it was just a theory that Napoleon had.
Right. Well, and everybody believes that they're going to use firepower to solve the problem. Firepower helps, but no battle's ever over with till some poor fool of an infantryman sets foot on that ground and occupies it. And
I told somebody that too the other day. I said, look, you got to have boots on the ground, man.
Well, and you got to realize that the Army of the Potomac, they'd held their ground for 2 days already. Okay, they weren't going to give that ground up, and they had a darn good position. Okay, they were behind a stone wall. They were behind a stone wall. They were on a hill. They were on high ground. They had the position to hold. So,
and not that, a lot of people don't realize too. The Confederacy had I hate to get off in Gettysburg too, but they had 6 miles they were across. The Union had less than 2 miles. They had lines that they could bring in reinforcements in a matter of seconds.
And the Union line was shaped like a fishhook. They could bring somebody from the far side of the line and reinforce the high water mark, and they could be there in 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Farthest point of the line, they could double quick there in 15 to 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Whereas they was not going to give that position up.
Yeah, they're not going to give that spot up. And the thing is, remember what I said? Most of your shells went long. What are those guys behind that stone wall seeing behind them? They're seeing shells explode. They're seeing the majority of those shells explode to the rear. Where the heck are you going to run to, man? You going to run into the fire? No, you're going to hold your ground. You're going to fight like hell.
That's a good point too. I don't know if you got time for one more question, but why? Okay. Because I don't know if you have time to come out. All right, because I remember Longstreet arguing back and forth, about the artillery. Or he said this too about guns to send support the artillery. why, when the charge began, and maybe it did, but just as the movie didn't show this, why were the Confederates not blasting away with artillery, trying to keep their heads down? And I brought this up in a tactical thing the other day. Why are you not blasting away at the Union batteries to keep them locked up in a barrage duel to keep them from being focused on the Confederate Army, the infantry soldiers?
There's a couple reasons why you didn't do that. Well, first of all, I'm going to show you this shell here again. You see the white band around the middle?
Yeah.
That's a lead. Over the time when that shell was fired, that lead sabot would come flying off.
You froze up on me. Froze up on me again. You held it up and you said that's and then you froze up.
And right there. That's the lead sabot around the middle. Over half the time on this type of shell and other type of shells that had sabots on them, those sabots would come flying off in flight. Firing those over your own troops puts large chunks of lead and iron flying through the air that will fall out of the sky into the back of your own troops. You don't want to fire over your own troops. You're going to cause casualties.
But I mean, even when even before they got to say the Emmitsburg Road, you could have still been firing above them to try to keep at least try to keep enough of their guns locked into a duel with you to keep their to try to get as many of your troops there.
Well, you could do that, but like I say, those sabots are going to come flying off. They're going to come flying off the same velocity as a shell, and you're going to be killing your own guys with friendly fire with every round you fire. Now, the other reason why, even if they did keep firing, the Union Army is not going to shoot back at those cannons. Union Army is going to be shooting at that infantry, because guess what? Artillery at long range might kill you. Advancing infantry will kill you. The infantry is the bigger threat. As soon as that infantry started advancing, it didn't matter if the entire Confederate, E.P. Alexander's entire corps of artillery still kept shooting. If they had unlimited ammunition, they could have kept shooting. Guess what? Those Union guns are no longer going to be shooting at that artillery. Well, some of the guns, like the big 20-pounders, the guns that are designed for counter battery fire, are going to be sniping at the enemy's artillery. However, your Napoleons, your 3-inch ordnance rifles, your 10-pounder Parrott rifles, they got a new target, and that's the target they're going to have to focus on, because if they don't kill that infantry, it doesn't matter what that artillery 2,000 yards back does, because those guys with Springfield and Enfield muskets with bayonets on it are going to kill you. And you've got to butcher them or you're dead.
That's a good answer. Okay. In the movie, Armistead comes over the top and you hear him say, turn the cannons on them. The day is ours, man. Turn the cannons. Well, and I always thought, turn the cannons. Okay, it makes sense. But you turn the cannons and then your man's locked in a hand-to-hand combat. That's really not doing you any good, is it? I mean, why are we turning the cannons?
Well, you're going to turn the guns and you're going to fire down the flanks of the enemy where maybe your troops aren't engaged yet. Okay, you got one right there at the stone wall. Okay,
right.
It's a whole line that's 1,000 yards long on both sides. If you could swing Cushing's battery was firing 3-inch ordnance rifles. That's where Longstreet went over the wall, was in Cushing's battery. They were shooting these and they were shooting the canister of those. If they could have got across that wall and they had people who were trained to turn those guns and fire down the Union lines where the rest of the Confederate Army had not made it over that wall yet, now you've got firepower up close. If you could fire,
you got a problem then.
you could literally have decimated that line. And now those guys that are behind that wall have got two things to worry about. They've got a cannon firing down their flank, and they've got infantry coming over the wall. But the counterattack happened, and they had lost so many men getting over that wall, they just didn't have the strength to do it.
Okay. Here's another interesting thing I've always thought of. I can remember when, Longstreet tells them, hey, we got enough, artillery left for one more fight or whatever, blah, blah. And then I know the part where he's out there, and Alexander's telling him, we got to slow down our fire. We got to support the infantry. And Alexander's like, Colonel Alexander, do you not have enough ordnance when this was begun? And so I got to think, you're planning a trip to, invasion like that with 70,000 men. I'm not sure how many batteries the Confederate Army had. You'd probably know better. How many?
110 guns.
All right, so you got 110 guns there, and you're expecting to fight, throw everything you got at them in this major battle. How many shells you bring? What do you think's enough to sustain a good hard?
The thing is, it isn't a matter of why didn't they bring enough? They probably didn't have enough.
No. I didn't mean why didn't they have enough? Because I doubt he thought he'd been there in a 3-day struggle. No. If you thought you was going into a battle like, hey, I'm fixing to go down here and meet them at Chancellorsville or wherever, and if this is going to be one fight, how many shells you think you need for one good scrap?
Each gun had 3 chests of ammunition that traveled with the gun everywhere. And depending on the size of the gun, the number of shells in those chests varied. For like a 3-inch rifle, you had in the limber chest that traveled with the gun, you had like 6 rounds of canister, 20 rounds of shell.
Yeah.
And then another 10 rounds of time fuse shell, and then you had a certain number of solid shot. So you had about 36 rounds in that limber chest. Now on your caisson, which also followed behind it, you had 2 more ammunition chests that you could draw from. So you had 3 times that. So you had about 100 to 120 rounds per gun.
Now 120 rounds per guns. Okay.
Yeah.
Guns, so that's 300-400 shells there.
3 or 4 shells per battery.
I don't really think he didn't bring enough. I just don't think he thought he was going to be locked in that kind of fight for 3 days.
Also, you had your batteries also had cargo wagons following that had more shells in cases.
Oh yeah, that's what he said. It's taking they forced us to move the caissons to the rear. Yeah.
He says you need to replace. Yeah.
Yeah, I love when because I can see the look on the guy who played Porter's face when ammunition says, Longshirt says, just get some more ammunition and keep it hot.
Mm-hmm. Well, you got to realize something too. Porter's artillery barrage was one of the heaviest artillery barrages the Confederacy ever put out.
It was the largest ever in the United States.
Yeah, literally, when Porter was doing the preemptive barrage on the heights there on Culp's Hill and at the copse of trees, you literally you've got all those guns and they were firing nonstop for hours, okay? And you could fire if you're firing fast, you can fire 2 rounds a minute, okay? So 2 rounds a minute per hour, you're going to burn through your ammunition.
You have none left. Yeah.
Yeah, you literally are burning it up. So literally, even if Lee had broken that line that day, if the Union Army was not completely destroyed, you would have had no artillery ammunition to carry on that campaign.
Yeah. Okay. So, hypothetical. Let's say that he does exactly what he wants to do. He runs away. All the center, they take that position, and with minimal casualties, 11,000 men. Meade's forced to fall back, and he falls back to Pipe Creek. Lee has no artillery left. He cannot follow with no artillery support. Is that be a correct statement?
He may have had a few wagons of shells left, but literally, when Lee told Porter what he wanted, Porter brought up the artillery. He brought up all of his ammunition. He packed his chests full, and he pounded the crap out of them. There wasn't much left.
So he would have. Even if he would have had a handful of shells left to go try to fight another battle.
He couldn't have fought another Gettysburg. He couldn't even fought a battle the size of Manassas after.
That's Gettysburg. So good. I'm glad you said that, because I would like to bring that up. We have our Gettysburg discussion. I'm gonna have to make sure you're on there. That even if they take that position, he was out of artillery.
Yeah, Porter Alexander had burned up. Yeah, he may have had a wagon load or two. You know, a wagon load or two of shells, that's a couple hundred rounds. That's for that army, a couple of rounds is 2 volleys. That's it.
I mean, okay. I mean, that was a great, great story right there. I mean, so, I mean, even if he falls back, they take that position. Lee was basically out of ammunition.
Literally, the third day at Gettysburg was do or die for the Army of Northern Virginia.
Well,
they had to smash them and smash them hard.
I've heard people say that, you know, well, he should have wasted those minutes. And I was like, it's almost like he was at a dead end road. You know, there was no turning back. We either pile through this or we're done.
It was do or die. They had to hit the Union so hard that they either broke and ran, or were destroyed completely, or bloodied their nose so hard that they couldn't follow them back into Virginia. Now, they hit them hard and they bloodied them hard, but if Meade had followed up, the artillery that was left, they transferred all the shells that they had in their baggage train to the guns, and the artillery was ready to hold a rear guard action. If Meade had come over the top of that stone wall and charged, they'd have spent the last of their ammunition and it had been done.
So, because there was, you know, the fresh corps that they had there on their way back from limping back from Pickett's charge, had Meade sit there and he organized everything he had, and he came right back across that field at them. There was nothing they could do but sit there and had nothing.
Yeah,
they had no artillery support.
Well, they might have had a few rounds of canister because that barrage was long range. They wouldn't have used their canisters, so it'd have been bloody for about 10 minutes until they exhausted all their canister shot. And then it's done.
Man, I'm so glad you have brought that out because I've never even, you know, it was about a counterattack, because I've often heard people, they criticize Meade about his rear guard, you know, pursuing Lee. And I've defended Meade on this. I said, look, he's just lost 30% of his army. I said, they're battered. I said, Lee's retreats. It's going to take him a minute to get things organized, get ready. I said, he did pursue Lee. I said, and you got to remember at the same time, he's also facing a tenacious rear guard action by Pettigrew. And right. in the back of his mind, he's thinking, I'm chasing Bobby Lee, who's just waiting for me to make a mistake.
Right. So in his mind, he's thinking, I'm still fighting Robert E. Lee. He's a smart man. He's going to fight to a defensive position like I just left, and he's going to grind me a hamburger.
That's exactly what he was thinking. I told people, I said, that's in the back of his mind. He's thinking, I've just beaten the man. He's scared to death. He's going to make a mistake, and when he does, Lee's going to chop his arm off.
Not to mention that he's only had a command of the Army of the Potomac for a week.
Yeah, for a week. And, you know, to me, and I heard Michael Phillips used to say this, and I believe it's the truth. Meade is the Rodney Dangerfield of the Union Army. He doesn't get the respect that he deserves as a commander. I mean, he was the man who beat the man.
He did something that McClellan couldn't do in years.
Well, I mean, and look, I know my Union fans are probably going to get mad at me for saying this, or my Union friends, but look, he didn't beat him the way Grant ever beat him. I mean, you want to get down to it? I'll just go and say it, because I know they'll get mad at me later. Tactically, in the battles, Lee beat the hell out of Grant. The Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, North Anna. I mean, Lee didn't lose those battles.
I always tell people, he didn't out-tactical Robert E. Lee. He out-battered him.
Yeah.
You look at military history, and it's a recurring theme. You had to have a general that realized where your advantage is and take advantage of it. The Confederates had the leadership. The Union Army had the population, and they had the equipment, and they had the manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like I tell, I said, I'm not criticizing him for it. He knew he had the numbers, he knew he had the resources, and he knew if I just keep pounding, I'm going to win. It's the same thing that I point out to in World War II. I mean, like, you know, we did the same thing.
Patton went up against the German army in Europe, knowing that he was going to lose 4 Sherman tanks for every Tiger that he knocked out. But he knew that Ford and General Motors and Dodge could crank out 6 Sherman tanks.
Mm-hmm. And I've said to one guy, I said, let's look at it like this: campaigns, and straight up battles.
Mm-hmm.
Would you rather have your, and I'll with Grant and Lee, would you rather have Patton on a one-on-one situation, Patton, or one-on-one situation, winner take all? Would you rather have Patton or would you rather have Rommel?
I'd like to have Rommel with Patton.
I would take Rommel. No, 6 days a week, twice on Sunday. Same thing with Lee and Grant. If you had one battle, you had to take one commander, one fight. Who you taking? Taking Lee.
Now, if I could put Robert E. Lee in charge of the Army of the Potomac, I'd rule the continent.
Oh, I'd probably ruling the world.
Yeah. Well, but what I tell people, I says, you know what? The Battle of the Wilderness and Chancellorsville were fought just a couple miles apart. Okay. What's the only difference? What's the only difference? It's how the Union Army responded to Robert E. Lee. The Wilderness, I mean, any other commander other than Ulysses S. Grant would have went, holy crap, we're not going to fight him in there. He just smacked us in the teeth in here. We're not going to fight him in here. We're going to back away. General Grant says, he smacked us in the teeth. Let's stomp on him.
I've made the same statement like that when I was a kid, young, and I'm probably sure you've seen the same things too. Every history book, war class I took, it was said by everybody, or in the history books, major tactical victory, Army Northern Virginia. That's how the Wilderness was written. Now they did this, I don't want to say revisionist, but now it's inconclusive. The only reason it's inconclusive is because Grant moved forward. That was the worst defeat the Army, that was the first beating, that was the worst beating the Army of the Potomac had ever taken, was in the Wilderness. And had any other commander taken it, and I mean, even at Chancellorsville, I mean, Hooker or Grant lost more men than Hooker did. Had any other commander, like you just said, been beaten that bad, they would have went across the line. And can you imagine in 1864 with Lee gathering up, he's got 65,000 men, giving him one more chance to maneuver.
Yeah. Well, I mean, literally, what won the war was, well, the fact that, number one, Sherman was cutting the guts out of the Deep South.
Oh, yeah,
so the country that the Confederacy had was just going away. I mean, it was going away fast. And
I'm saying that hypothetically, in 64,
then you got Grant, who's like, he bloodied our nose bad, but guess what? We still have corps, not just divisions, not just regiments. We've got corps that haven't been engaged yet. Push them forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he would not, and nothing. He kept Lee, which other commanders didn't do. He did not allow Lee to get it in his element and maneuver. He moved Lee to Spotsylvania, moved him to Cold and with Lee without the ability to maneuver. I mean, there was, that was not his game. He had him fighting a protracted defensive war. Now his techniques at Cold Harbor, well, that's for another day in Spotsylvania. But yeah, he would not allow him to maneuver. And
I mean, my dad always told me, says, in a fight, son, a good big man is going to beat a good little man every day. Okay, but a good little man will beat a bad big man every day. Okay, I
believe your dad was correct on that.
Yeah, the Confederate Army was the good little man for a long time until they ran into a big good man, and that man's name was Ulysses Grant.
So I think I forgot to ask you this while back. Was you in the Army? Was you in the artillery in the Army?
I was not. I volunteered when I was 18 years old, but they found out that I did some stupid stuff when I was a teenager and blew all the cartilage out of my right knee. And they said, Uncle Sam, don't want to pay your medical bills. So I went to college, and I was a history teacher for 27 years.
Oh, history teacher for 27 years. Okay, well, and that's pretty good too. What is it about the artillery that got you interested in it?
Well, I went and saw a Civil War reenactment when I was about 6, and just the rumble of the guns got to me. But I went to on vacation when I was about 9 years old, we went on vacation in Tennessee, and I went to Shiloh, and I was just mystified by these guns. I was drawn to them. My dad and mom couldn't get me away. I had to go look at every one of them, look at the differences. And then I went home and I started reading about the differences. And said, well, a cannon's not just a cannon. There's differences between all of them, and for they do different things. And and I had to learn the difference. And then when I got to be 15 years old, a friend who worked for my dad, invited me to attend a Civil War reenactment, and they put me on a cannon crew. And the first time I pulled that lanyard, I was hooked.
How many people did it take to run a crew?
On a regular field piece, you need to have 7 crew members and the gunner, so 8 total. You can run it down to 2. As a matter of fact, you can drill and run a cannon crew with 2 men. Basically, one man's just holding his thumb over the vent on the back, and the other guy does everything else. But to do it effectively by the drill, 8 total.
And I imagine one of them's a spotter that's.
No, your gunner spots the fall of the round. All the gunner does is give the command, sights the piece, and spots the fall of the round. You've got one man, the number 1 man. He swabs the bore, and he rams the cartridge down. The number 2 man is on the opposite side. He uses the worm if there's any powder bag fragments left. He uses a worm, which is a metal hook, to extract it. Then he puts the shell in the gun to be rammed down. The number 3 man stands at the back of the gun on the right-hand side. He holds his thumb over the vent hole, the touch hole in the back, so that no air gets in there. See, the way you make sure that gun doesn't go off is that wet swab has to suck all the air out and put out any embers that are in that gun. And if they let any air in from the back, it's just like a bellows. It'll fan those embers, and you stick that bag down in there, boom, it goes off. So that guy has to hold his thumb over that vent the whole time until it's loaded, and then he takes a copper wire and he pierces the powder bag, and he puts the primer in there, and he holds it in there until the number 4 man, who is on the left-hand side, stretches the lanyard tight and pulls it tight and fires it.
Okay. Answer me this, because I was listening to this girl talk about her family people getting killed and horse artillery getting killed at Fredericksburg or something. So horse artillery, the way this girl was explaining to me, with the fight going on, charging, would they bring horse artillery right up to where they was attacking? So he was attacking a position, and they had horse artillery. Would they bring the horse artillery all the way up to where the initial conflict was supposed to take place?
It was called a gallop. It was called a flying artillery or horse artillery. They would use lighter guns, the 6-pounders, the 3-inch rifles. Jeb Stuart's horse artillery was led by a man named Pelham. And
John Pelham.
Yeah, and at Fredericksburg, he's the man who took 2 guns and attacked the Union Army as they were sitting there after they'd crossed the river. And it was watching Pelham after Lee told Stuart to withdraw his horse artillery. He's just struck by the gallantry of Pelham's horse artillery. And that's where his famous quote, "It is a good thing that war is so terrible, lest we would grow to love it so much."
That's where Lee said that came from.
Yes.
So I mean, I'm guessing that'd be the first person you'd take out, though, right? If you was up there in a fight and you seen them bringing up some horse artillery, you'd shoot the horse.
Well, yeah. Number 1, that's the number 1 target. If you see artillery on the move, you don't shoot at the guns. You don't shoot at the crew. You kill those horses.
That's what I would think. The first thing you do is shoot the horse.
Right.
Yeah.
The casualties among flying batteries was incredibly high because they were exposed to so much danger. I mean, they didn't have the advantage of range like a standard artillery battery did. They were getting right up there into the musket fire and air firing canister at close range into the flanks. And it wasn't used very often because it was, in most cases, was not very effective. It was a throwback to the days of Napoleon. Napoleon's tactics were he'd have his light batteries, his galloper guns, go up along the side of the infantry and try to get into the flank of the enemy's infantry and fire an enfilade down the line. And they still tried to do that during the Civil War, and they realized that I mean, well, look at Fredericksburg. Yeah, it was Gallant. Pelham sent 2 guns out. One of them got blown to pieces. He had 50% casualties in like 5 minutes.
This girl, she said that she was on her family. They was in was for the Union, and she said there was just horses all over the field too. There's the Union was trying to bring artillery and support. And I didn't know if she
everybody thinks that because artillery has horses, it's horse artillery. That's incorrect. Every piece of artillery in the Civil War was drawn by horses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a flying battery or a horse artillery battery, all the cannoneers were mounted too, so they could move as fast as the cavalry. There's light artillery, and then there's horse artillery. It was a flying battery.
That's some good stuff right there, man.
And the number of horse artillery batteries in the Civil War were minuscule. They were tiny. Just a few on.
I read that. I think that I when I was actually doing some studying, and I think that there was a total was. I mean, somebody might think this sounds a lot, but over all of a battalion.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
there were like, say at Gettysburg, there were probably 30 Confederate batteries. There was only one horse artillery battery at Gettysburg. And there was almost none in the Union Army because the Union Army said, first of all, it's a waste of horse flesh. Number two, it's not very effective anymore. And number three, the skill it takes to have a good working flying artillery battery is phenomenal.
I think I didn't speak or didn't make myself or didn't speak right when I said that. When they said that they meant among all the flying artillery units together would have made up a battalion itself.
Maybe, yeah, just a few batteries.
Not like every army had a whole battalion of them. They said between all the one or two here or there, it might have made a battalion.
Right. It would have been maybe 5 batteries on each side total.
Not many at all. In a hi, I remember that Gettysburg, and he goes, "Is that artillery firing?" Yeah, we got. I think it's what he say. Pender up ahead of 4 and Rhodes with 2 in reserve. In a corps, how many batteries came in a corps?
It all depended. I mean, literally, technically, they used to do one battery per brigade, so you'd have maybe 3 to 4 batteries for a division, and you'd have maybe 10 or 12 batteries for a corps.
Or 10 or 12 batteries for a corps, okay. And each one of these, sorry, so 12, let's say 12 batteries per corps. Were they up under one central commander?
No, they were all, well, in the Union Army more so than the Confederate Army. That was the problem with organization of artillery during the Civil War. I mean, literally, you went from the brigade battery system where you'd have a battery for every brigade. Then you went to a corps system. Then they went back to the battery brigade system. Then they went to back to a corps system. Then they went to divisions of artillery. I mean, it was really chaotic, and they never could really figure out how to, efficiently use artillery during the Civil War. Neither side did. The Union did a better job than the Confederacy did, because they started to learn how to mass batteries and to actually put all their fire to.
So there was nobody in charge except for, I guess, the commander of the brigade or division itself over the artillery. I mean,
well, there was an army chief of artillery, but really
with each corps.
Yeah. The chief of artillery basically just made sure that they had enough ammunition, enough guns. He didn't actually say, okay, no, General Sheridan, you can't have 2 batteries.
Okay, because Alexander, right? He was Longstreet's chief of artillery.
Yeah, he was Lee's chief of artillery for the Army of Northern Virginia.
what, I thought there was somebody who was actually it was actually the head of artillery for Northern Virginia, but Alexander was Longstreet, or Alexander had a different position. I thought.
Well, anyway, again, it's that confused organizational structure of the artillery.
Okay. Okay. All right. So anyway, so what would they do like in a battle like that? So he just picked Alexander to go lead it, or
Lee would say, "Hey, I need 6 batteries here." Alexander would say, "Okay, we're going to send Rockbridge Battery. We're going to send 2nd Company Washington Light Artillery. We're going to send the Richmond Howitzers." They go there.
Okay, I got a question for you. Let's say that one of these hypothetical battles. He's got they're going to try to cross right there on this river, but he's only got a brigade apart. Our divisions here. Let's go destroy them for the rest of them get across, and he's got 4 batteries in them. Who commands those batteries? Would it be the highest ranking artillery officer there that would take over and command it, or would each battery be commanded by a different officer doing their own thing?
Each battery is commanded by its own battery commander.
Now, yeah, no command and control.
No. You give them a basic idea. It says, okay, I want artillery fire put on that bridge. It would be up to the artillery battery commander to position his battery in the most efficient way to put the fire on that bridge. Okay,
so that brings me to a better question then. When in Gettysburg, I gotta get ready for this fight. But anyway, Lee says, "Go find General Ewell. Tell him I want fire placed on that hill, as much fire as possible." So then you've got these artillery guys there going, "Well, which hill? Culp's Hill, or this ridge over here? This ridge with these? Which hill do you want us to fire at?"
Well, if you say that hill, but you're not seeing which hill he's pointing at, you're going to have
4 hills there.
Whatever hill's in front of them.
I mean, because I forgot. Guy told me, and I knew the first 3, but he said besides Culp's, there was actually a 4th hill. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, you got 4 hills, each of them's occupied by a different amount of troops. Well, which hill am I shooting at? Which hill do you want me to take out?
And more than likely, see, that's why artillery today is so great compared to back then, because we use the map grid section. We want fire on these coordinates. And taking that to 6 decimal points, you're giving them a position that is within a couple meters of where you want that shell to fall.
Okay? Oh, and I've got another good. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You finish, and I got another question for you.
Have back then. He says, there's General Lee says, "I want fire placed on the hill in our front." Well, that gets back to the artillery commanders that are several miles away. And, well, the hill that's in General Lee's front is not the hill that's in their front. But they're going to follow the orders on that hill.
That is so great.
Yeah, man, I gotta get back to work.
Hey, let's do this again, man, because I got more questions for you. Especially because I want to talk about,
No problem. Anytime.
I want to talk about siege guns next time.
All right.
All right. Sounds good, brother.
All right. Hey, good talking to you. Be safe.
Hey, good too, man.
Bye-bye.